Hey everyone, and welcome to the second of the part of the Isak video series. I wanted to talk this week about a book that I've been reading for the last few weeks. This is the Spoon River Anthology, and it's by Edgar Lee Masters. This anthology is written in the voices of more than 200 citizens of a fictional Midwestern town, and all these voices are speaking beyond the grave. The idea is that there's this particular Midwestern graveyard, the residents of this small town, former residents, and they're all telling a certain story about themselves and their life, about their grudges and their hopes and their disappointments, their regrets. The old line about the dead have no secrets comes to bear on this one. And apparently when it was published, it drew a lot of attention for evoking the kind of voices that residents of small town actually knew. You know, not the romanticized small town folk, you know, of many popular novels of the time, and certainly the book uncommonly centered the wide range of these voices. The people who are telling their stories here are children and older folks. They're prostitutes, they're lawyers, they're mothers, they're fathers, they're people who've traveled the world and people who've never really left their backyard. And what's interesting is that death doesn't seem to have affected their perspective too much on the world. In other words, it seems that the grudges that these folks had in life, they carry beyond the grave. The more petty ones ramble about how their gravestone has been treated. One of the voices who speaks about his death in a fire, talks about how his body is actually mislabeled, that him and another person had been confused for each other. Their bodies burned beyond recognition, and now he's buried in this cemetery, while his counterpart, so to speak, is buried in the Jewish cemetery a few towns away. So the Spoon River Anthology has a certain soap opera theatrical appeal to it. You know, it appeals to that voyeuristic tendency of all of us to know what's really going on. The interactivity of the voices is really compelling, you know, to find one person who is, you know, passionate about and passionately grateful to his parents for having made him a success in life, you know, is juxtaposed with the voice of his mother, who is you know, mourning the secret that she had never told anyone about how her son was actually not her husband's child. So it has that appeal to it, and that's definitely the initial glisten to it. But what's also further interesting about the Spoon River Anthology is that it's very plain spoken, you know, and maybe this is to be expected, you know. But when a person picks up a poetry collection, I think a lot of folks expect, you know, metaphors to be leaping off the page, and you know, the rhythm of the language to be carrying them from line to line to line, and, you know, with good reason. But perhaps because Edgar Lee Masters is trying to evoke the very real voices of the people of this fictional town, he's chosen language that sounds almost as if it had been that it's distinctly conversational. And it's interesting because even though us readers have the opportunity to read one person's monologue to the next person's monologue to the next person's monologue, and we get a certain sense of a conversation given the interactivity of these lives and the stories they're telling about this town, the people who are speaking in each particular poem don't know it's a conversation. You know, for them it is a monologue, and I gotta say the image I get when I read this book is of a very quiet, very modest graveyard in Illinois. That's where this town is set, where Edgar Lee Masters is from, and I imagine these voices, I don't want to say doomed, but compelled to tell these stories, tell this particular story that they've chosen over and over and over and over. And I imagine this graveyard of colliding voices and colliding stories, none hearing the other. None of them are listeners anymore beyond the grave, but storytellers. And it is the nature of their life that gave them the story that they tell beyond the grave. Now, some of that's fed by my own imagination, but it does, I think it does do credit to Edgar Lee Masters' project, that something so haunting does come to my mind. And also, just as an interesting side note, this book got put in my hands by a bookseller at the Whistle Stop Bookshop in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where I passed through when I went on a literary road trip back in September. And when I told this bookseller what I was up to, he immediately put this into my hands, saying that this is a particular classic of Midwestern literary culture. And apparently, Masters based a lot of these lives and these stories on the residents of two particular towns in Illinois. And rumor has it that you can go to graveyards in these towns and find the surnames of a lot of these people, just literally, that he had literally just taken off of people's tombstones and written a story about them. Well, a fictionalized version of them, of course, but, writers know how that goes. Fiction, truth, kind of the same thing sometimes. Before I let off here, I wonder if you'll begrudge me an opportunity to actually read you one of these poems. This one comes in the voice of Nancy Knapp. And what struck me about this one is that while it has the same very simple language of the majority of the poems, it gathers up steam towards the end and comes at for me, a surprising conclusion. By the time we get to Nancy's poem, we don't really know too much about her family or her heritage or anything like that. So, this is the first Spoon River poem you've heard, you'll be okay. It goes like this. Well, don't you see this was the way of it? We bought the farm with what he inherited, and his brothers and sisters accused him of poisoning his father's mind against the rest of them. And we never had any peace with our treasure. The murrain took the cattle, and the crops failed, and lightning struck the granary. So we mortgaged the farm to keep going. And he grew silent and was worried all the time. Then some of the neighbors refused to speak to us, and took sides with his brothers and sisters. And I had no place to turn, as one may say to himself at an earlier time in life. No matter, so-and-so is my friend, or I can shake this off with a little trip to Decatur. Then the dreadfulest smells infested the rooms. So I set fire to the beds, and the old witch house went up in a roar of flame. As I danced in the yard with waving arms, while he wept like a frozen steer. And that's it. And I guess I don't want to spend too much time talking about that particular poem, but that image of Nancy Knapp burning down the house that had caused their family so much trouble and dancing wildly in the rain while her husband cries like a frozen steer is really startling to me, and especially coming where it does, about midway through the book, where, as I mentioned before, metaphors are few and startling images rare. This one stands out even more, and it's interesting because the story of this woman is essentially that she's gone mad, and it's interesting to think about how it is madness that results in these startling images, madness that results in the metaphor. Anyway, I might be getting a little ahead of myself here, but anyway, it's a book that I found entertaining. I can't say that I'm in love with it, but it's immensely readable, and such an interesting project. I highly recommend it. If you have any other thoughts about the Spoon River Anthology, I'd very much love to hear them. Thanks, and have a good night.